Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. Nestled on the edge of a dense Oregon forest, Zach Harper's quiet life was his sanctuary, a legacy of his family's hard work and independence. But when a new HOA, led by a power-hungry president, tried to claim his land, Zach found himself in a battle he never sought, fighting for his rights and his peace. Zach Harper had always valued simplicity. A 35-year-old veteran, he left the structured chaos of military life for the serenity of the Oregon countryside, where he inherited his family's land. The property, nestled at the edge of a dense forest, had been in the Harper family for generations. It was a modest but cherished piece of land, a rolling stretch of greenery bordered by a sparkling creek with a cozy cabin Zach called home. Life here was unhurried, his days filled with farming, repairing old tools, and quiet evenings under a sky bursting with stars. The land's beauty and tranquility, however, had recently come under an unanticipated threat. Just a year ago, a new housing development, Pine Hill Estates, sprouted a mere quarter-mile from Zach's property. The development, with its cookie-cutter houses and carefully manicured lawns, brought a wave of new residents who seemed more concerned with appearances and property values than the natural charm of the countryside. Along with the homes came the Pine Hill Homeowners Association, HOA, a governing body notorious for its rigid rules and overreaching policies. Zach initially paid no attention to the HOA. After all, his land was outside their jurisdiction, as confirmed by the documents he had pored over before his move. He assumed their rules and meetings would remain contained within their tidy boundaries. But Pine Hill's HOA, under the leadership of its ambitious president, Melissa Grant, saw Zach's property as an opportunity rather than an exception. The first sign of trouble came on a breezy autumn morning when two HOA representatives appeared at Zach's front gate. They were dressed impeccably, their clipboards and practiced smiles signaling their purpose. "Good morning, Mr. Harper," one began. "We're from the Pine Hill HOA. We'd like to discuss the benefits of joining our association." Zach, polite as always, listened as they outlined how HOA membership could improve his property value and provide services like landscaping support and communal resources. While they spoke enthusiastically, Zach's attention wandered to his vegetable garden and the sound of birdsong, things he valued far more than neatly trimmed hedges or HOA-approved fencing. When the representatives finally paused, Zach smiled and said, "Thanks for the offer, but my land isn't part of Pine Hill. I'm not interested in joining." If Zach thought that was the end of it, he was sorely mistaken. Over the next few weeks, letters from the HOA began arriving in his mailbox. Each one reiterated the benefits of membership and hinted that, as a neighboring property, his participation was all but expected. Zach ignored the letters, believing his refusal to join was clear. Yet the letters kept coming, their tone growing progressively sterner. Then came the visit from Melissa Grant herself. She showed up unannounced one morning, stepping out of a sleek black SUV in heels that seemed out of place on a gravel road. Melissa was in her early 40s with a polished appearance and an air of authority that bordered on arrogance. She wasted no time. "Mr. Harper," she began, her voice sharp and unwavering, "I'm here to inform you that as your property borders Pine Hill, you are legally considered part of the HOA. This means you are subject to our bylaws and associated fees." Zach furrowed his brow, crossing his arms. "That's not true," he said firmly. "My land predates Pine Hill, and I've got the documents to prove it. I didn't agree to anything involving your HOA." Melissa's eyes narrowed. "I'd suggest you read our policies more carefully. Your proximity makes you an implicit member. Non-compliance could lead to penalties." Zach's patience was thinning, but he kept his composure. "I won't argue with you here. My land isn't under your jurisdiction, and I won't be joining Pine Hill's HOA. That's final." Melissa's smile faltered, and for a moment, a flicker of annoyance crossed her face. "Have it your way," she said before walking back to her SUV. As the car drove off, Zach felt the first stirrings of unease. Something told him this wasn't over. For Zach, life was about independence and the freedom to live without interference. But Pine Hill's HOA, and Melissa in particular, seemed determined to challenge that. The seeds of conflict had been planted, and Zach's quiet life on the edge of Pine Hill Estates was about to be turned upside down. Zach had hoped Melissa's visit was the end of the HOA's meddling, For weeks, there was no further contact, and life on his farm returned to normal. The calm didn't last. One chilly morning, Zach found a white envelope tucked into his mailbox, marked with the Pine Hill HOA logo. Inside was a notice of violation, citing his property for failing to meet community aesthetic standards. Specifically, the letter criticized the height of his grass and the unsanctioned wooden fence he had installed years ago to protect his garden from deer. Zach was baffled. He reread the letter several times, certain it was a mistake. His land was not within Pine Hill's jurisdiction. Tossing the letter aside, he returned to his daily tasks, confident that the HOA couldn't enforce rules on his property. But the notices didn't stop. Over the next month, Zach received several more, each accompanied by fines that grew progressively steeper. When the fines reached several $1,000s, he decided it was time to confront the issue head-on. He called the HOA's office, only to be met with bureaucratic indifference. The receptionist, speaking in a clipped tone, reiterated that his property was considered part of Pine Hill Estates due to its proximity, and that he was obligated to comply with their rules. Frustrated, Zach hung up and called his attorney, Anna Morrison. Anna, a sharp and experienced lawyer specializing in property rights, quickly reviewed Zach's case. She confirmed what he already knew. The HOA had no legal claim over his land. Within days, Anna filed for a formal injunction against the HOA, demanding they cease all actions against Zach. The court granted the injunction, effectively barring the HOA from imposing fines or claiming jurisdiction over his property. For a time, it seemed like a victory. The notices stopped, and Zach began to relax, believing the worst was behind him. However, Melissa wasn't finished. While Zach busied himself with planting winter crops and repairing his tool shed, the HOA president launched a smear campaign. Flyers began appearing in mailboxes around Pine Hill Estates, accusing Zach of refusing to contribute to the community and jeopardizing neighborhood safety. Neighbors who had once waved warmly at Zach now gave him wary glances. Although many sided with him, a vocal minority, swayed by Melissa's rhetoric, started treating him as an outsider. Melissa's persistence didn't end there. She orchestrated a meeting at the Pine Hill Community Center, inviting residents to discuss issues impacting neighborhood harmony. While Zach didn't attend, he later learned that much of the meeting was spent vilifying him and framing his resistance as selfish and disruptive. Despite the growing tension, Zach held firm. He refused to engage with the HOA or attend their meetings, focusing instead on his land and the supportive neighbors who still visited him regularly. Months passed, and the harassment dwindled, replaced by a quiet unease. Zach thought he had weathered the storm until he returned from a brief trip to town to find his worst fears realized. Pulling into his driveway one crisp morning, Zach noticed something unusual near the far end of his property. A cluster of vehicles and machinery was parked near the tree line, and workers were busy digging into the frozen earth. Zach's heart sank as he drove closer. Large stakes marked the area where a foundation was being poured. Concrete trucks rumbled as workers rushed to complete the job. Zach parked his truck and grabbed his documents, including his property survey and land deeds. He approached the site, unsure of what to expect. As he neared the workers, one of them, a burly man in a hard hat, stepped forward, blocking his path. "Can I help you?" The man asked gruffly. "This is my land," Zach said firmly, holding up his papers. "What's going on here?" The man smirked. "Afraid you're mistaken. This is a Pine Hill project. Ms. Grant is building a guest house. You'll have to leave. She doesn't want anyone interfering." "Leave?" Zach said, incredulous. "This is my property. You're trespassing." The man shrugged and handed Zach a set of documents. They appeared to be permits, stamped and signed, authorizing construction. Zach scanned the papers, his stomach churning. Something didn't add up. The boundaries shown on the permit overlapped with his land. Pulling out his phone, Zach began photographing the site, determined to gather evidence. But the worker stepped in front of him, waving a hand. "Hey, no photos. You're not allowed to document this without approval." "I'm not breaking the law," Zach shot back. "I'll stop when I'm done." The situation quickly escalated. The worker grew hostile, shoving Zach and shouting for him to leave. Zach kept filming, capturing every shove and insult. Finally, he stepped back and called the police. As he explained the situation to the dispatcher, he saw a familiar black SUV pull up to the site. Melissa Grant stepped out, her expression cold and commanding. When the police arrived, Zach wasted no time explaining his suspicions. He showed his documents and the footage he had captured, insisting the construction was on his land. Melissa, clearly agitated, tried to dismiss Zach's claims as baseless. The officers, however, ordered the work to stop until the matter could be investigated. Standing by his truck, Zach watched as Melissa glared at him, her carefully crafted facade beginning to crack. The battle over his land had reached a boiling point, and Zach knew it was far from over. Zach stood firm as the construction site fell silent under the watchful eyes of the police. The workers shuffled awkwardly, glancing at Melissa for direction. Her composed demeanor from earlier was gone, replaced by visible frustration. "This is ridiculous," she snapped, stepping toward the officers. "I have all the necessary permits. He's just trying to cause trouble." One of the officers raised a hand to calm her. "Ma'am, we've reviewed Mr. Harper's property documents, and they appear valid. Until we confirm the boundaries and your permits, all construction on this site is to cease immediately." Melissa's lips tightened into a thin line, but she forced a smile. "Of course, officer," she said through gritted teeth. "We'll comply, but I expect this misunderstanding to be resolved quickly." As the police began documenting the site, Zach used the moment of calm to gather more evidence. He walked the perimeter, snapping photos of the staked boundaries, construction equipment, and the partially built foundation. Each shot felt like a small victory, a step toward proving his case. Melissa, meanwhile, hovered near the officers, making calls and trying to assert her control over the situation. After the police left, Zach wasted no time contacting Anna, his attorney. He provided her with the photos, videos, and the permits Melissa's workers had handed him. Anna examined the documents carefully, her brow furrowing. "These permits look questionable," she said. "The boundary lines have been altered to include your land, but the official records don't match this. This is a clear case of fraud." Within days, Anna filed an official complaint against Melissa and the HOA. Meanwhile, Zach installed additional cameras around his property to ensure no further surprises. He also contacted a local surveyor to perform a fresh boundary analysis, reinforcing his claim. As the case moved forward, Melissa's overreach began to unravel. The permits she had submitted were traced back to a friend of hers in the county office, who had expedited and falsified the paperwork. When questioned, the official admitted to bending the rules under pressure from Melissa, adding fuel to the legal fire against her. The HOA's inner circle began to fracture as members came forward with accounts of Melissa's behavior. Some admitted that they had long felt uneasy about her tactics, but had been too intimidated to speak up. A few even revealed that Melissa had threatened to levy fines or revoke HOA privileges if they didn't support her plans. The courtroom was tense on the day of the preliminary hearing. Zach sat quietly, a folder of evidence in hand, while Melissa entered with her lawyer. She maintained a defiant air, but the cracks in her composure were evident. As testimony unfolded, it became clear how deeply her schemes had gone. The surveyor confirmed that part of the foundation was indeed on Zach's land. The falsified permits were presented, along with statements from the coerced county official. Then came Zach's turn to speak. He recounted the months of harassment, the fines, the smear campaign, and the shocking moment he discovered the construction on his land. His photos and videos painted a vivid picture of Melissa's aggressive overreach. When the video of the workers' hostile behavior was played, a murmur spread through the courtroom. Melissa's lawyer attempted to paint Zach as uncooperative, but the evidence was overwhelming. By the end of the session, the judge ruled that the construction be halted permanently until the matter was resolved and scheduled a full trial. As Zach left the courtroom, he felt a mixture of relief and determination. He had stood his ground and exposed the corruption of the HOA, but the fight wasn't over yet, and he knew Melissa would not give up without a final push. The courtroom trial proved to be the culmination of Melissa's unchecked ambition and Zach's relentless determination to protect his land. As the proceedings unfolded, Melissa's carefully constructed image of authority crumbled under the weight of evidence against her. Zach's attorney, Anna, presented a comprehensive case. She opened with the property documents clearly defining the boundaries of Zach's land and the illegal overlap shown in Melissa's permits. The surveyor's testimony was decisive, detailing how the foundation had encroached well beyond Pine Hill's jurisdiction. Photographs and videos from Zach's cameras added an undeniable visual layer to the argument, showing not only the extent of the trespass, but also the aggression Zach faced when attempting to document the situation. The falsified permits became a key point of contention. The official who had issued them under Melissa's pressure testified against her, revealing a pattern of coercion. "I was told to expedite and adjust the documents," he confessed. "She made it clear it was a favor that would benefit me later." The courtroom buzzed with murmurs as the depth of Melissa's manipulation was exposed. For her part, Melissa fought hard to maintain her position. Her lawyer argued that she acted in the community's best interest, framing Zach as an uncooperative outsider disrupting neighborhood harmony. But the weight of evidence and witness testimony proved insurmountable. HOA members, emboldened by Zach's stand, took the witness stand to describe Melissa's history of overreach. Stories of intimidation, unjust fines, and arbitrary enforcement painted a picture of a president who had abused her authority for personal gain. When the judge rendered the verdict, the ruling was swift and damning. Melissa was found guilty of fraud, forgery, and illegal land encroachment. She was sentenced to prison time for her actions, a rare and striking punishment for such cases. Additionally, the HOA was ordered to pay Zach significant damages for emotional distress, legal fees, and the cost of repairing the disruptions caused by the unauthorized construction. The foundation on Zach's land was to be removed immediately, with all expenses falling to the HOA. As Melissa was led out of the courtroom, her head held high despite her defeat, Zach couldn't help but feel a mix of relief and triumph. The fight had been long and grueling, but justice had prevailed. The fallout from the trial was seismic for Pine Hills HOA. Melissa's allies within the organization were swiftly removed, and the HOA underwent a complete restructuring. New leadership focused on rebuilding trust with the residents, many of whom felt vindicated by Zach's victory. The HOA adopted stricter oversight policies, ensuring no single person could wield unchecked power again. For Zach, the ruling was more than just a personal victory. It was a symbol of standing firm against corruption and greed. As he returned to his land, now free of trespassers and foundations, he felt a renewed sense of peace. The community, once divided by Melissa's schemes, began to unite in appreciation for Zach's courage. He had defended not just his own rights, but the principles of fairness and justice for all. In the months following the trial, the echoes of Zach's victory resonated far beyond the boundaries of his property. Pine Hill Estates, once ruled by Melissa's overbearing hand, underwent a transformation that surprised even the most cynical residents. With Melissa behind bars and the HOA forced into reform, a newfound sense of community emerged among the homeowners. The first noticeable change was the HOA itself. Under the court's directive, a temporary oversight committee was installed, composed of impartial local officials and a few trusted residents. This committee focused on eliminating the arbitrary rules and policies that had caused so much discord. Fines were revisited, unjust penalties were refunded, and many rules were rewritten to promote fairness and transparency. Homeowners who had long felt powerless under Melissa's leadership began attending meetings, confident their voices would now be heard. Zach, meanwhile, found himself at the center of an unexpected movement. Neighbors who had once kept their distance began reaching out to him, expressing their gratitude and admiration. Families who had endured Melissa's fines and harassment shared their stories, thanking Zach for exposing the corruption that had plagued their lives. Zach's courage had inspired them to stand up for their own rights, and many began participating actively in the HOA's restructuring efforts. Beyond Pine Hill, news of the trial caught the attention of local media. Zach was invited to speak at community forums, sharing his experience and offering advice to other homeowners dealing with similar conflicts. His story became a rallying cry for property owners who had faced overreach from HOAs or other governing bodies. Zach, initially hesitant about the attention, came to realize the importance of his fight in empowering others. On his own land, life finally returned to normal. The foundation from Melissa's unauthorized construction was removed, and Zach restored the affected area to its original state. He planted new crops and expanded his vegetable garden, savoring the peace he had fought so hard to protect. His property, once viewed as a battleground, became a symbol of resilience. The neighbors' attitude toward Zach also shifted dramatically. Where there had once been suspicion or silence, there was now camaraderie. Families visited his property for barbecues and gatherings, bringing homemade dishes and sharing stories. Zach's annual Independence Day cookout, once a small event, blossomed into a community tradition, attended by nearly everyone in Pine Hill Estates. For Zach, the most gratifying change was seeing the neighborhood itself transform. The atmosphere grew friendlier and more collaborative, with residents supporting one another instead of living in fear of arbitrary fines. Community events flourished, from block parties to cleanup days, creating bonds that had been absent under Melissa's divisive leadership. Reflecting on everything, Zach felt a deep sense of accomplishment. He had defended his land, his rights, and his peace of mind. But more than that, he had helped spark a change that restored integrity to the HOA and brought unity to a fractured community. His fight, though exhausting, had left a lasting mark, not just on his property, but on the lives of everyone around him. As the sun dipped below the Oregon treetops, Zach sat on his porch, his loyal dog at his feet, and watched the golden light fade into dusk. The events of the past year felt like a distant storm now, its echoes quieter with each passing day. He reflected on the battle he had fought, the obstacles he had overcome, and the lessons it had taught him. Defending his property had been more than just a personal fight. It had been a stand for fairness and justice in a community that had lost its way. Zach had entered the conflict simply wanting to protect his family's land, but the consequences of his determination rippled far beyond his property line. Melissa's downfall and the subsequent restructuring of Pine Hills HOA marked a turning point for the neighborhood, transforming it into a place of collaboration rather than control. Zach had grown too. The quiet veteran who once preferred solitude now found himself surrounded by neighbors who admired his courage and sought his guidance. His journey had proven that even the most daunting challenges could be met with persistence, and that standing up to injustice could create lasting change. More importantly, Zach's victory reminded the entire community of the importance of unity. Where there had been fear and division, there was now trust and mutual respect. Neighbors worked together, shared meals, and supported one another in ways they never had before. As Zach leaned back in his chair, he allowed himself a smile. His family's land remained his own, a sanctuary he could continue to cherish. But it was more than that now, a symbol of resilience, justice, and the power of standing up for what is right. The property lines hadn't changed, but the bonds between the people living near them had grown stronger than ever.